And now a reading from the book of Jonah. But Jonah rose up to flee unto somewhere or other from the presence of the Lord. And he went down to Joppa and found a ship going to a place. So he paid the fare thereof and went down into it to go with them somewhere from the presence of the Lord. All right, I'm listening, I hear you, and I am happy to oblige your many requests to talk more about Tarshish. If you will recall, we got into this briefly in our Aeneid series because Dido, the queen of Carthage, is from Tyre in the Aeneid, and Tyre is often mentioned in connection with Tarshish in the Bible. And so I mentioned that there's a whole wormhole that we could kind of go down here, but we don't have time when we're doing the Aeneid to go into this little corner of biblical history. So let me know if you're interested, and maybe we'll do a mailbag on it. And in fact, you are interested, it turns out, and there's so much here. It's so much fun that I thought we'd do a whole Tarshishapalooza episode, because you need to be Tarshish maxing. It's 2025. Get with the program. We are Tarshish maxing in 2025. And this is one of those little corners of biblical history that is too much fun, and it does actually touch upon translation, which is typically what I talk about in these other side episodes as well, because it's one of these examples of a place where historical information contributes to how we may or may not read the Hebrew of the Bible. So I had a number of people write in to ask me to cover more about this, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you the various different options, the debate about where Tarshish is, what Tarshish is, and then I will give you my personal opinion and, of course, settle it once and for all. No, I have no more certain knowledge than anybody else does, but it sure is fun to talk about. But first, it's an exciting time because there is finally a new term open at the Ancient Language Institute. New year, new term. ALI is one of my longest standing sponsors. I have the highest possible respect for the work they do. This is language instruction done right, and it's ancient languages, so the kinds of languages that we talk about on this show. It's catnip for young Heretics listeners. If you're enjoying listening to me talking about the Aeneid, and you're enjoying my translations, and you're enjoying me talking about the artistry of Virgil, what better way could there be to go deeper into this great poem than to actually learn Latin and be able to read it in the original? It's one of the chief joys of scholarly life when you start to be able to do that. And what's really cool about the Ancient Language Institute is that they make you start reading original stuff really soon. You're able to dig into these original texts like the Aeneid very early on, no matter where you are in your learning process right now. If you've already done some Latin or some Greek, or if you've never even touched anything in any language other than English, they can help you. They can meet you at your level. And their summer term is now filling up. Registration closes on April 19th. So what you're going to want to do is go to ancientlanguage.com/heretics. This is the best kept secret on the internet because I don't print this anywhere. I don't tweet about it. I don't talk about it on my Substack. I just do it here for listeners to the podcast. If you go to ancientlanguage.com/heretics, you can enter the offer code Spencer, that's just my name, SPENCER, and get a discount on your registration fee. They've got tons of great course offerings, Latin, Greek, Biblical Hebrew. They've just started Old English, Anglo-Saxon. I'm actually working through their Old English book right now, Oswald Bera. I had a friend on who wrote the book, Colin Gorey, to talk to me about it. We did a cool interview episode together. So you can sign up for any one of those, whichever interests you most. And for my teachers out there, I know I got some language teachers and history teachers that listen to this podcast. They're also running a course for teachers. It's called the Latin Teacher Boot Camp. This is a 5-week online summer intensive. If you're looking for something to do to sharpen your skills, maybe get back to basics, rekindle your love of the subject over the summer, this would be a great option for you. And it's also a prerequisite for joining their mentorship year. They have a mentorship year for teachers where they'll give you weekly online meetings to just help you keep your love of the subject alive, maybe give you some new ideas for classes you've been teaching for a while. Really great stuff for anyone at any level. One more time, it's ancientlanguage.com/heretics. And the discount code is just my name, Spencer, SPENCER, to go deeper into the good stuff. One of the people who wrote in, by the way, is my old friend, Peter, who also reminded me to mention that on the episode about Dido, I slipped up with when I was talking about the mother of Achilles. I said that Thetis was the mother of Aeneas. She was actually the mother of Achilles. So that's in the YouTube version if you were watching there. Sorry about that. Mea culpa. I corrected it in the subsequent episodes, but just a correction from Peter, as well as an invitation to talk as much as I want about Tarshish. Careful what you wish for. Don't give a mouse a cookie. Don't give a scholar the opportunity to talk about Tarshish. But no, I think this will be fun. So what is this situation? Well, the most, to me, interesting role that Tarshish plays in the Bible is the one that I alluded to at the beginning in the opening here, which is that Tarshish is where Jonah is trying to flee to when he gets on a ship to run away from God's call. God wants Jonah to go to Nineveh and preach to the enemies, really, of Israel and warn them of the coming destruction. He doesn't want to do that. That sounds like a really terrible idea. He's afraid he's going to get killed or worse. And so he tries to flee, and he goes down to Joppa in Israel, and he tries to get a ship that goes to Tarshish. And when I was reading it earlier, I was like, well, somewhere, something, underpants gnomes, because nobody quite knows where Jonah is trying to go. And famously, he never actually gets there, so we don't get an answer. There's a big storm, and it turns out God is sending the storm to try and get Jonah's attention. And then they cast him overboard, and he ends up swallowed by the whale. And there's a whole long scenario and situation. And so people naturally have wondered, well, where were you headed to? Where were you off to, Jonah? And there are a number of other appearances of Tarshish in the Bible. It comes up a bunch of times, and some things seem clear about it. For one thing, it definitely seems to be a trading partner with Tyre. That's why I brought it up in connection with Dido, is remember that in the ancient world, the Phoenicians were one of the civilizations to be reckoned with. They were the guys to beat if you wanted to build a trading empire. And the Carthaginians, who fought with the Romans many, many hundreds of years later, they were the heirs to a massive and long-standing series of Phoenician cultures and civilizations. They were a seafaring people, really good at building ships, and on their ships, they would travel and they would make trade deals, and they built up this elaborate network of trading partners and economic relationships and just generally a mercantile sort of empire with various different stages throughout history. But in the Bible, whenever Tyre comes up, and often it's paired with Sidon, Tyre and Sidon, they tend to be standing in for wealth, which is kind of a helpful thing to know, actually, because often you'll be reading the prophets or you'll read some passage that's listing cities and it just comes across as a bunch of random names, but usually each one of them would have had associations for the original readers. And Tyre would have been a place that you would have mentioned, sort of like, I don't know, Geneva, Switzerland, somewhere where people are rich, where they keep their money, where they have a lot of wealth stored up. That would be Tyre. And Tyre's always sending out ships, and Tyre's always getting all this wealth and money. And one of the things that's frequently happening is the biblical authors are saying, even Tyre will fall, or even the wealth of Tyre will not save you, because material wealth is not as good as having God's protection or having God's favor. So that's the role that Tyre tends to play in the Bible, and Tarshish is often associated with it. We get it, for instance, in Isaiah chapter 23, verse 6, "Pass ye over to Tarshish, howl ye inhabitants of the coastland." This is foretelling doom for Tyre and a variety of other places, including, it seems like, many of Tyre's trading partners. So that's a natural place for Isaiah to mention Tarshish. When John Calvin gets to this bit in his commentary, he says, the prophet addresses not only the inhabitants of Tyre, but foreigners who were connected with them by trading, and bids them go elsewhere and seek new harbors. So pretty reasonable Good call, John. Mr. Calvin seems like that makes a lot of sense. He doesn't tell us much more than that because there's already some confusion in the historical record about just where exactly it is. And it doesn't seem like it's all that important for most of these stories, even though we sure would like to know. It's not like there's necessarily a major plot point that hinges on it. This is just Isaiah saying, in the same way that if you were going to say, "Oh, woe to the World Economic Forum. Woe to Switzerland. Woe to Zurich. Woe to, who knows what other countries. Woe to Germany. Woe to all these different countries that are involved." You would be just kind of listing places and people. Woe to Klaus Schwab, right? So it's not like we desperately need to know what this place is, but also we would kind of like to know what this place is. Like, this is sort of interesting, and we don't have a definite association with it. We do know for certain, even if we weren't willing to take the Bible's testimony, we would know that Tarshish exists and was real. It shows up in other places as well. Quite notably, it shows up in an inscription by King Esarhaddon, who was one of the fearsome monarchs of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. So he's leaving inscriptions about how great he was and how many places he had conquered. And one of his inscriptions mentions a place called Tarshish, which people have thought maybe this is Tarshish. The inscription says, "All the kings from the lands surrounded by sea, from the country Idanana and Iman as far as Tarshish, bowed to my feet." So that kind of makes it sound like maybe Tarshish is an island. As far as all the kings from the land surrounded by sea, Idanana is Cyprus, we think, and so maybe Tarshish or Tarshish is some kind of island. And in Isaiah 23, Tarshish is associated with the Hebrew word which can mean island. So some people thought this is an island somewhere, perhaps in the Mediterranean, perhaps to the west, where maybe Jonah was trying to escape, and Isaiah was talking about it as one of the trading partners. Pass ye over to Tarshish, howl ye inhabitants of the Yoshevei. So that might mean those who dwell in the islands, like, for example, Tarshish. Part of the problem, though, is that can also mean coastland. It's anywhere on the brink of the sea. And so, in some context, it's clear whether is coastland or island in the Bible. But in this context, it's not so clear. In fact, that's exactly the sort of thing that we would like to know. So this is an example where knowing about Tarshish would help us to know about how to translate the word And since we don't have further information, we can't be sure whether this is supposed to be ye inhabitants of the islands or ye inhabitants of the coastland. The Jewish Publication Society's translation, which I often use for Old Testament texts, has coastland here. And that's because it is often, many of the different places that are candidates for Tarshish are not islands, in fact, but are rather coastal cities. In fact, Josephus, who is an ancient historian, a Jewish historian, has a massive work called Jewish Antiquities, and he locates Tarshish. He says Tarshish is the same as Tarsus, which is in Cilicia, and that is in Asia Minor. So it's on the coast of what is now Turkey. So that would be as in a coastland. Maybe Tarshish is Tarsus, which would be kind of fascinating for Christians because Tarsus, you may recall, is also the birthplace of Saul of Tarsus, who eventually becomes Paul the evangelist. And Josephus has a very interesting reason for thinking that Tarsus is Tarshish, and that is he believes this is one of the places that was settled by the descendants of Javan. Now, Javan is a grandson of Noah. Japhet's son is Javan. So Noah's son is Japhet, Japhet's son is Javan. That means Javan's one of the descendants of Noah, and you may recall that the descendants of Noah go spread out after the flood to populate the world. That's kind of their job. And the different peoples in biblical history, the different races of the world, are understood to have been descended from different sons and grandsons and descendants of Noah. And Javan is the guy who creates the Greek race. The Greeks are descended from Javan, and that word, Javan, is actually just the name for Greece in Hebrew. So in Hebrew, if you see a word translated as Greece, it's probably Yavan or Javan. And so basically in Jewish Antiquities, Josephus is accounting for all the different races of the Greeks from different sons of Javan, this region in Turkey in Asia Minor, called Cilicia, was once called Tharsia, after Tharsis, son of Javan. And so tracing this elaborate, intricate lineage of the Greeks and all their different races, basically he's saying that Tarsus is named after a descendant of Noah. And this is the particular descendant who ended up in this place on the coast of Turkey, Asia Minor, gives us Tarsus, and that's the trading partner of Tyre, that is in Lebanon, which we get in the Bible. Not impossible, pretty nearby, seems like a place where the Phoenicians could have been trading. This is the sort of thing, by the way, that Isaac Newton freaking loved. Newton was obsessed with the genealogies of Noah. He wrote tons of material trying to figure out who the different sons of Noah were and all their different roles in ancient history and antiquity and all this stuff. And so this is like, Newton would have loved this idea that the Greeks come from the descendants of Noah, and Tarsus or Tarshish is that place where, I guess if you think about it from Jonah's perspective, he would be sailing kind of up and to the west to try and get away from God's call, which is never a good idea. However, if Isaac Newton would have liked this, modern scholars have not liked it quite so much. And one reason for this is that the Phoenicians had trading partners all over the place, all throughout the Mediterranean. And it seems like Tarshish is the place where they may have gotten silver and tin. And so archaeologists have been looking for cities, either in the record or in their actual digs, places that have a lot of tin and a lot of silver. And that has led to this whole other set of investigations that doesn't place Tarshish on an island and doesn't place it in Asia Minor, but rather places it further out to the west as part of the more expanded trading network of of Tyre and the Tyrians. And this has made for one very top-notch candidate these days, and that is Tartessus in Spain, which had a lot of silver and tin. And this is also why some people think it might have been Sardinia, as you think, well, okay, Sardinia is an island. There have recently been deposits of silver found there. And so perhaps this was where Tyre was getting its silver, was from Sardinia, which is sort of to the west, and a place that Jonah might have been fleeing. Or maybe it was even further west in Spain, in Tartessus. Both of those are coastal cities that could have traded in silver and tin with the Tyrians, and so that's kind of the modern addition to the array of possibilities here, is maybe we're looking at a trading post further out. And this is, if you read later Bible commentary, so here's John Martin's Bible commentary, and this is on Isaiah 23 again. He says, people in Tarshish were to wail because of their economic losses. Tarshish was rich in silver, this is from Jeremiah, iron, tin, and lead, as we're also told in Ezekiel. Therefore, Tarshish was probably in the West Mediterranean where mineral deposits were plentiful. Many scholars identify Tarshish with Tartessus in southwest Spain. And these sorts of thoughts are probably why the JPS ends up translating E as coastline, is because nowadays the archaeologists who study these sorts of things from a material perspective think, okay, the Bible says silver and iron and tin. This is kind of to the west of the Mediterranean, maybe Tartessus in Spain, maybe Sardinia, based on recent finds. There's a couple other more out of the way possibilities, some sort of left field options that I wanted to throw at you just for completism, just so that we can have the full lay of the land. The Septuagint, that is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, which was created in the 3rd century BC, at one point translates Tarshish as Carthage, which would be extra interesting from our perspective as Virgilians reading the Aeneid, because of course Carthage would have been a major trading partner in the Phoenician routes, and for the story of the Aeneid, it's already an outpost of Tyre. So Tyre Dido leaves Tyre and goes to Carthage, and it seems like there might be a Jewish tradition that results in the Septuagint with identifying Tarshish with Carthage. So Tyre and Tarshish is Tyre and Carthage. In Ezekiel 27, verse 12, Ezekiel says that Tarshish did business with Tyre, and the Septuagint translate this as Carchedonioi emporoi su, the Carthaginians, the trading partners of you, Carchedonioi emporoi su. The Vulgate, that is St. Jerome's Latin translation, 5th century AD, much later, also here has Carthaginenses, negotiatores tui, the Carthaginians, your trading partners. And that's a translation of those of Tarshish, who were your trading partners, Tyre. So maybe there's like a Jewish idea here being handed down that actually what we're identifying here is Carthage as an offshoot. There's also a really interesting sort of like what are you smoking, but I'm kind of into it sort of option from Rashi, who's an 11th century AD French rabbi. And in his commentary on Daniel, we have this very odd statement, a vision of Daniel of a figure whose body is like Tarshish. And perhaps that just means his body is richly studded with silver or something. But Rashi says, our sages of blessed memory explained in Tractate Hulin, his body was 2,000 parasangs large, like the measurement of the sea named Tarshish, and that is the Sea of Africa, the Mediterranean. So maybe Tarshish actually just means the Mediterranean Sea. If we didn't have any other evidence, and if this were our only idea, this would be my favorite idea, because Tarshish is often just kind of a byword for this Mediterranean network of trading posts. And so maybe it is just the sea through which the Phoenicians were trading. And I really like that notion, actually, except that we have all these other, like the Esarhaddon inscription, and we have Josephus, who's actually telling us, no, this is Tarsus, this is a place, and we do have a lot of other cities kind of mentioned in connection with it. So if we were just trying to think, like, based on the Bible and no other evidence, I might say Rashi's option is the best option, even though it's much later and seems kind of speculative. But it also does kind of make sense of Daniel, if his body was like this giant flowing sea. But ultimately, I do think we have to have a city here. So sorry, Rashi, I think we have to go with one of the city options. And I take the modern point that we're looking for somewhere that can trade in tin and silver, which is why people start to think maybe Spain. But I'm very skeptical of these sorts of things because people pronounce with great certainty, yes, we've now found silver mines in Sardinia, and therefore it can't possibly have been Tarsus, because we haven't found any silver mines in Tarsus. I just think, yet. I mean, this is like a couple hundred years of archaeology in the modern period, and we're so disinclined to take the ancients at their words that I'm a little bit more interested in Josephus here, saying that it was actually Tarsus from in Asia Minor. And I'm particularly interested in that just because it would be so cool if Tarshish, where Jonah was trying to flee, was Tarsus, where Paul would eventually be born. Just the symbolism of that, for sheer symbolic value alone. If you think about it, Jonah is this prophet who's trying to escape being a prophet, trying to run away from God, who's ultimately going to be sent to the Gentiles, right? That's what he doesn't want to do. He doesn't want to go to Nineveh and preach to the Gentiles. And so he tries instead to go to Tarshish, which in this telling is Tarsus. And then Paul, who is born in Tarsus, is trying to persecute non-Jews when he ends up getting turned reluctantly into the prophet to the Gentiles. So that connection between Jonah, who wants to go to Tarsus to avoid being prophet to the Gentiles, and Saul, who is born in Tarsus and ultimately ends up becoming prophet of the Gentiles, is this awesome kind of ring composition, like we were talking about earlier, this rhyme between the unwilling and unworthy prophets of the Gentiles, guys that don't want to do God's will, that don't want to go preach to people outside of the Jewish faith, and then end up being called by God to do that. So I love the connection between Jonah and Paul there, if in fact Tarshish is Tarsus. And Josephus lived a lot closer to the time than we did, and even though he's working in these genealogies that sometimes seem like kind of mythological or legendary to us, it also seems totally plausible that he kind of knew some information about this, and that he was giving us the, picture of the descendants of Noah that was actually carried down in genealogies that he had much more access to than we do. A lot of material got lost. He could have known something we don't know. Love the symbolic resonance there. So my wishful thinking is that it's totally Tarsus, and Saul and Paul and Jonah are all connected through this one ancient city, which would be so cool. If it's not that, my next guess would probably be Sardinia, because it's an island which would connect with the Esarhaddon inscriptions, and it seems like it might have had some of the mineral resources it needed to do the trade. I don't really like Tartessus as much. It's awfully far away. But yeah, my bet's on, first my hope is on Tarsus, my bet is on Sardinia, but ultimately nobody knows. It's sure fun though to talk about this stuff, and I hope you've enjoyed it. As always, send me your nerdy rabbit hole questions that I can do in a shorter episode. I always love answering them. It's always my pleasure to do so, and I will see you next time for more truth, beauty, and the stuff that matters.